Book 101 review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. She is the author of the book, Chief of Staff, no other than Miss Emily Sander. Welcome to Book 101, Miss Emily, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
Certainly. Thank you for having me, Daniel. My name is Emily Sander, and I grew up in Seattle, Washington, and Daniel and I are neighbors. We just found
Yes.
out in Vancouver to Seattle, not that far. And I had a whole corporate career. So I worked at large corporations like Microsoft and Amazon. I was lucky enough to be on the testing team for the original Kindle device for Amazon when that first launched. And then I worked for a series of startups and got myself into leadership roles in different client facing teams and operations teams. And then I became chief of staff for a digital marketing company. And that role is the strategic right hand advisor to the CEO and also to the rest of the C suite executive team. And so from that, I moved into my coaching practice and I got a whole bunch of chiefs of staff reaching out to me saying, "Hey, you are a chief of staff and you're also have the coach training." And they would ask me all these fantastic questions and I would get these over and over and over again. And I thought, well, someone needs to write a book on this stuff and get this information out there. And so I decided to write an insider's perspective on the chief of staff.
Miss Emily Sander, thank you so much for sharing your talents to the world. So, what is the primary role of a chief of staff in an organization?
So the short analogy I like to use is saying, the six pack cans of soda that you get at the store, and the plastic thing on top of the cans that holds all the cans together.
Yes.
That is a chief of staff. So they will hold the leadership team together, make sure everyone is moving in the right direction, rowing in the same direction, and working together. So that's my short analogy. Other analogies could be like an air traffic controller. So the big tower at an airport that directs all the planes, make sure no crashes happen, make sure there's safety in the airport, and everyone gets to where they're supposed to be on time. Those are my two quick explanations for what a chief of staff is.
Interesting job. I want to be a chief of staff, Miss Emily. So, how does a chief of staff differ from other leadership roles, such as an executive assistant?
Yeah, so there's a big difference between an EA and chief of staff. That's probably the top misconception. So I would say the chief of staff is much more strategic. So they're considered the C-suite. So in this and the C-suite team, and they are a proxy for the CEO. So they can stand in for the CEO when he or she is unavailable or on a plane or in a different meeting. The chief of staff is dealing with long-term strategy and an EA is often more tactical and practical and dealing with logistics. Both, by the way, are very, very important to a well-running team. I love EAs and they're a critical function, but they are separate from a chief of staff. One other unique aspect of the chief of staff role from even other C-suite members, other executive leaders, is while a COO will be in charge of operations, so chief operating officer will be in charge of operations, a CFO will be in charge of finance. The chief of staff sits above department lines, and so they see across the entire business. So they will bring all the different operations, finance, product, technology, compliance, all of those different components together, and they see the big picture.
Well, thank you for that information, Miss Emily. So, how or what are the key responsibilities of an effective chief of staff?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The classic chief of staff answer is it depends, but let me expand on that. So, if you're talking to a chief of staff at a five-person startup, that remit and that role and responsibility is going to be very different than a chief of staff at Intel or Microsoft or IBM or some of these multinational companies. So let's take the chief of staff at a startup company. They could be taking on a functional role, so they could have a dual hybrid role in that they could be COO and chief of staff for a while. And then as that company evolves and grows, they might be in charge of hiring the full time COO or head of operations and then hand that off to them. And they might help the founder CEO with fundraising, with their pitch decks for investors. They might help the now hired COO with scaling operations. And so their role, the chief of staff role, evolves as the company expands. And I've had chiefs of staff who are running or are helping with multinational corporations, and one of their jobs is to travel to all the different geographic locations and get boots on the ground and do listening tours to all the different offices, and then report back to the CEO on how things are going and what needs to be communicated more or done differently. And then they also go to those locations and take the message from the CEO and make sure that message is being conveyed effectively, and people in those locations on the ground are hearing what the CEO intended to with that all company email or with that all hands conversation over Zoom.
So, Ms. Emily, why do executives and leaders benefit for having a chief of staff?
Yeah, so the biggest reason is they get time back. And in that time, they can think about things versus just reacting and firefighting. So I say that leaders get paid to make a few high quality decisions every day. And if you're not making high quality decisions, and that's your job as a CEO or a C suite executive, and you're not doing that very well, then you're not doing your job. And so a chief of staff can help you make better decisions because they get you more time. They also get you information you need, so that cross department, holistic, across the company viewpoint. And so you have context for like, oh, why that's happening. And oh, I heard, I heard Jenny say that, but now I understand like where she's coming from more. And that actually affects our team in a way that I wasn't aware of before. So it helps you make better decisions. And there's almost always in any company, in any team, projects or initiatives that don't fit neatly into a functional area. So it's like it's kind of HR, but it's not quite. It's like it's kind of compliance or special projects, but not quite. You need someone who can take those kind of X factor roles, X factor projects, and strategic initiatives and take point on them and carry them through. So a chief of staff is often doing cross functional, company wide, long term initiatives. The last thing I'll leave you with, there's many in this list, but the last big one is being a confidant and a trusted partner for the CEO. Because if you think about it, the CEO is the only CEO. It can be very lonely at the top, and they need someone who they can confide in. They need someone who they can be vulnerable with. And they also need someone to say, hey, you need to step up, or hey, you're wrong about this, and speak truth to power. And so having that relationship with a chief of staff and CEO is unique. It's one of a kind, and there's a special bond between those two people. So just at like a human level, having someone you can have those conversations with, having someone you can trust at that deeper level brings a lot of value to the CEO.
Beautifully articulated, Miss Emily. Very well said. So let's talk about skills and qualities of a great chief of staff. What leadership skills are essential for a successful chief of staff?
Yeah, so organization and prioritization is close to top of the list, because you not only have to organize and prioritize the things that are flying across your plate and in your inbox, which again is cross functional all across the company, but you also have to keep your CEO on track and often have to nudge and guide the different executive leaders. So you're having to do, you're not just doing it for yourself, you're playing 3D chess and you're trying to move these pieces for the entire team. So I think organization, prioritization is paramount. Um, these these roles are often filled by a low ego individual, meaning they're perfectly fine being behind the scenes. they actually like not being in the spotlight. So they're fine kind of working behind the scenes and making things happen and having other people get credit. The third one I'll throw out here is communication. So when you're chief of staff, you are communicating every hour of every day to someone. That can be on Slack, that can be on email, that can be an in-person meeting, that can be to the media, that can be to all hands companies, to potential vendors or strategic partners. So you're communicating all day long, and you really, I work with chiefs of staff on really crafting that skill of communication and understanding, here's my audience in this setting, and then like right after that I have to switch context to speak to this group over here, which is a different message, a different tone. My role is a little bit different over in this conversation, and you have to be fluid and able to adapt to those different communication channels and communication goals. So really having strong communication, sometimes it's a light touch, sometimes it's a suggestion, sometimes it's a consideration or questions, sometimes it's very direct, it's very forceful, like this needs to happen now, sense of urgency, let's drive this thing through. So all these different layers and components go into communication. But I always tell chiefs of staff, and I would say any leader or even any business professional, if you can only invest in one skill, communication would be it, because there's only upside. There's only things that can get better if you hone that skill.
Certainly. So, how does a chief of staff balance diplomacy and assertiveness?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's situational. So you can't just do one thing all across the board and be fine. You really have to say what if we're in a meeting or in a situation where we're communicating, what is the end goal of this communication? So let's say we're at a team meeting, right?
Yes,
Um, like, what do I want my team members to think, do, and feel at the end of this team meeting? Like, what's my goal? And then almost reverse engineer into that and say, okay, what do I need to say or not say? What do I need to do or not do in this moment to try to get us closer to our end goal? Sometimes that is being very um, quiet and observant and really listen to people, and you're conveying to them, you're paying attention with nonverbal feedbacks. Like, I'm in this conversation with you, I'm not saying anything, but I'm in this conversation with you. And that can be a very good thing to do. And sometimes it is okay, at this point, like, I got to call timeout, stop, stop, stop. The way we're speaking to each other is not productive. So, like, heat level is at like an 8 or 9. Let's table this conversation for later and let's get back on track over here. And that can be a very direct message to the group. So, it's situational. It's what is the ultimate outcome that we want to have happen for this meeting. And one more variable I'll throw in there is, which people and personalities do you have at the table, right? So if you're dealing with, okay, John over here is known to be a hothead, that might be like cue you in to like, maybe I should jump in a little sooner than I think necessary because he tends to blow up very quickly. Or it could be, hey, I have a bunch of new hires here, they're all very nervous, but I want to elicit some conversation and some information and input from them of what they're seeing with fresh eyes in the company. So I want to ask like a really non-threatening question and then just be very happy and curious to listen to what they have to say.
certainly. So, let's talk about challenges and problem solving. What are some of the biggest challenges as a chief of staff faces?
Yes. How long do we have? There's lots of challenges. Uh,
Give me the
oftentimes,
yes, give me
oftentimes,
the biggest one.
yeah, the biggest one is when the principal, so the person the chief of staff reports to is called their principal. Most of the time it's CEO, could be COO or a VP. If if their principal doesn't explain that a chief of staff is coming or explain what this chief of staff's role is within the team, that can be very confusing to people. And the reason that's confusing is because, as we noted before, the chief of staff is so flexible and fluid, it can fulfill a lot of different roles in different companies at different stages. And so if you're like, hold on a second, like we had our existing team and all of a sudden this chief of staff shows up, who the heck is this and what are they doing, it could be like very confusing and or very threatening. So I often partner with chiefs of staff and their principals on how to message and communicate when a chief of staff comes on board, because setting that table and setting that foundation for a chief of staff to join the team is really important for everyone to be on the same page. So that's a huge challenge I see that can be real tricky if the chief of staff and principal aren't on the same page at the very beginning. And then I would say the second one, which is an ongoing one, is a chief of staff doesn't usually have direct reports. So they don't have a direct team, and they're often having to influence people and influence situations without direct authority. So they can't pull out the do this because I said so card. It has to be kind of cajoling or getting them to see why this is a good idea. Um, Rarely I would suggest leaning on the principal's name, like, hey, we're doing this because Daniel said we're going to do this. That's the way it goes. It's leading by influence, not direct authority. I think the other thing is just really good chiefs of staff will get what I call performance punished, meaning they're so good at their job that everyone will want them to do more things for them. And so they're like, oh, like Emily can do this, or Emily can do that, or Emily, why don't you take point on that, or Emily could run, run that leg of the race. And they have to be very adept and adroit at saying, I'm going to take this on and I'm going to delay this for a quarter. Or, you know what, this is actually most important for the overall company. I'd like to do this one. Like, I'd personally like to do this one, but this initiative over here is most important to the company and gives us collectively the biggest bang for our buck. So I'm going to choose to do that one.
Well, Miss Emily, thank you so much. So, what would be your advice for those people out there who want to be chief of staff?
Yes, so I would put yourself in position to work on anything cross functionally. I would put yourself in position to learn about different aspects of the business because whereas for certain fields you want specific experience like accounting, or if you want to be a lawyer you need like certain credentials and certain sets of experience. With chief of staff you actually want a broad range of experience and background. The 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 range and like the different responsibilities you've had and the different roles you've had is actually a strength. So a lot of people are concerned, hey Emily, I've bounced all around in my career, I've done a hodgepodge of things, I haven't specialized in any. You might be perfect for a chief of staff if you like variety, if you're good with people, if you like learning, if you are okay working in ambiguity, if you like rolling your sleeves up and figuring it out, then a chief of staff role might very well be for you.
Certainly. So, what would be your short term and long term goals in writing?
Well, I just completed my third book, so I co-authored that with my former CEO and CFO, and that's on the private equity experience. It's called On Ramp to Exit, so that's out now. And I actually have kind of a in the back of my brain, I have like a fiction book, which I've never written before. I've always done nonfiction, but I don't even know what that would be. But maybe it's like a chief of staff like role in a different setting. Maybe it's something totally separate. I like superhero uh, movies, comic books, kind of X-Men, Superman, Batman, that type of thing. So that's been playing in the back of my mind for a long time. And now that this latest private equity book is out, I'm like, oh, maybe this fiction book comes to the forefront.
Certainly. Good luck to your goal, Miss Emily, and thank you for your advice. So, what is a typical career path for someone who wants to become a chief of staff?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, there's not really like a direct career path. Like if you want to be an accountant and you got to go get a CPA and CFA, I would say get a broad range of experience in all different departments. I would also raise your hand for things you're like, hey, I'm maybe 60 to 80% qualified to do this on paper, but I really think I could do a good job. And I know the people who could help, and I know I could bring it all together and learn it. Say yes to those opportunities. Go get good experience. And um, that can be a whole host of things, but work with good people, work with smarter people than you, work with people who have different perspectives and see different angles in a situation than you. Um, go if there's volunteer basis mentorship programs at your work, like go be involved in those as both a mentor and a mentee. Make connections, have conversations, ask questions, add value, even when it's not your direct responsibility. If you see something that you think is noteworthy, or you're like, hey, I have a question, and I'm pretty sure other people do too, be the one to speak up and raise your hand, because that's how you get that's how you get noticed. Is not quite what I want to say. That's how you get noticed, but also that's how you show your value, and you show some of the traits as chief of staff.
Certainly. So, how can a chief of staff position serve as stepping stone to other executive roles?
How can they serve as a stepping stone? A lot of chiefs of staff will do the role on a rotational basis. So many companies will have chief of staff rotate every 18 or 24 months. And the chief of staff will get tremendous experience and get to learn about all aspects of the business, and then be redeployed into the company as a functional head. So I've seen this at like the VP level, or perhaps a director, SVP, just depends on the company. But if you do that for enough years, you actually have a fantastic leadership team, because everyone knows about the rest of the business, not just their functional area. But I've seen a lot of chiefs of staff take the role to get hands on experience and go back into the investing world. I've seen chiefs of staff become COOs. I've seen a lot of chiefs of staff um, do the chief of staff role as kind of a mini MBA program, and or training ground for becoming a founder and starting a company themselves. So it can be used in a lot of different ways. And I actually just spoke with someone who was a chief of staff intern, and a lot of MBA programs are placing chief of staff internship roles, which is new, and then they lead into different full-time roles within that company if they do well. So it's very versatile. There's associate chiefs of staff, there's deputy chiefs of staff, junior chiefs of staff. There's a couple different job levels you can do with the chief of staff role, but it's very versatile. And many people, I'll throw this in there, many people are fulfilling a chief of staff role under an entirely different title. So it might be head of business operations or VP of strategic initiatives, and they're called something else, but they're doing a chief of staff role. So it's very can be used in a lot of different ways.
So, Miss Emily, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, Food 101, in its fifth season, people, fifth season, with my co-host, Chef Alessandro, one of the specialty chef in one of the five-star hotel in downtown Toronto. So please do listen to our latest episode. We are reading our letter senders all over the world. What role does a chief of staff play in crisis management and decision making?
Yes, crisis management chief of staff usually runs point on a lot of that. So they'll bring all the stakeholders together. So, for instance, I worked for a website provider and digital marketing company, and so if the servers went down or our websites went down, that was like code red. So it was getting with our CTO, getting updates on root causes, working with operations and client-facing teams to get the communications out to our customers about it. Um, so they take point on a lot of the crisis management pieces. Sometimes, depending on what it is, if it's like an external crisis where, oh my gosh, like the reputation of our CEO has come under fire, they might work with marketing, communications, PR, crisis management consultants, things like that. But they'll usually be running point, or at least involved in those efforts. And then in terms of decision making, I mean, how I've seen it work best is when the chief of staff is at the table where those decisions are being made, and they're giving their input, and they're also facilitating that conversation to make sure the I always say the chief of staff's job isn't to have the right answer per se, it's to get the group to a good answer. I want to get the group to a good answer. So to facilitate and bring that out and draw that out of the group is what the chiefs of staff job is, and the CEO's job, of course, in those group conversations to make key decisions. There's a lot of soundboarding, a lot of brainstorming, a lot of uh, verbal thought processing between a chief of staff and and their principal too. So like I would be speaking with my principal every day. We would have short conversations, we would have set meetings, we would travel together, we would be in the hallway, we would have an idea and text each other. It was just kind of a constant kind of back and forth. And a lot of decisions were just made over the course of those communications. But chief of staff, very involved in both crisis management and decision making.
Miss Emily Sander, thank you so much for sharing your books to the world. So, can you please invite our listeners to support all your books?
Certainly. I mean, you can learn about all my books at my website, which is nextlevel.coach. So nextlevel, all one word, .coach. And that's the best place to find my latest books. And also, I host 2 podcasts and all the latest resources. I have a number of free resources for chiefs of staff and for also business professionals on my site as well. So if those are useful to you, then they are all there at nextlevel.coach.
Yes, people, let's support Miss Emily Sander because if you support her, more and more and more empowering books to come, of course, more empowering episodes of the podcast. So, Miss Emily, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Daniel.
More to come, people. See you soon.